Welcome to the Green Ring, and thanks for watching this note-by-note dissection of Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. This video is fourth in a series of 16 dedicated to Die Walküre Act 1. Built on nearly 2 centuries of scholarly literature, it's a massive journey I hope you'll take, one I'm dedicated to finishing. For an explanation of who I am and more on the reasons for this series, please check the preface video, first in a group of 6, building a foundation to this in-depth analysis. Before diving into this video, you may at least want to watch The Case for Erda, The Case Against Wotan, and The Case for Loge, which present my views on how and why Wagner manipulates his musical syntax as he does, in the process identifying key morphemes which I believe define the entire work. You'll find explanations for why the terms leitmotif, motif, and motive have been replaced by morpheme, module, and cell in the chapter titled Music as Text. Links are provided in the comments below. My aim is to mount subsequent videos each week with breaks of approximately a month between each drama's acts until the entire ring is analyzed. We pick up where we left off, Siegmund's vocal immediately following introduction of the famed love morpheme, top stave of page 21 in Dover's full score. The extant literature makes no serious argument against the expansion of Freya's Part 2, as the moment the pair falls in love, though it's difficult to glean from contemporary stage traditions. Several mountings strive for something close to the emotional intensity essential for this crucial moment, notably Kupfer's mountings for 1992 Bayreuth and Lisieux in 2003, along with Thielmann's 2017 Salzburg version. Possibly inspired by Chirot's radical 1976 Bayreuth bicentennial, however, a tradition has grown up of handling this exchange as profoundly uneasy for both parties. Even Kupfer and Thielmann, who avoid that failing, still can't match the passage's gently numinous thrill with visuals striking enough to root its syntax in the subconscious mind. This across-the-board tendency short-circuits sound to sight associations, leaving generations all but deaf to the work's syntactic riches. Atop extended octavo cello pedal, Siegmund gives thanks for the drink with 2 strophes of his personal morpheme, here shorn of ominous inverted ash intervals, first lifting a third into melody notes, while ending the second on its more wonted abandonment triad. Cellos cap each with the Sieglinde iteration, making this a close echo of the prior bundle first introducing that syntax. He reports the drink has restored his strength by lifting through reverse chord notes into yet another barrier pulse, a module unusually prominent thus far in the scene. The Welsung reports his sight is happily restored, a veiled but obvious reference to Sieglinde, lifting a 4th, only to dip a poignant minor 6th, then rise another 4th, a distortion of the curse's ringlust implication, which he tops with melody notes to end sweetly, yet ominously, on a descending arpeggio very like the ring fragment, whose final notes repeat a calmer version of the Rhine Maiden's playful turn, a module that reverberates an Albrecht's lust along with Wotan's dominance over the giants. As it often does, here it descends through a Welterb triad. These subtle hints of race and power in the wake of the ring aren't accidental and determine so much of what's to come. Violins at last augmenting cellos with another winsome Sieglinde iteration, Siegmund asks who his rescuer is, atop a harmonic shift in dotted cello minims loaded with emotion, his voice lingering hauntingly on static notes ended by another melody note strophe. Violas rise as if in his twin syntax, but extend its arpeggio another 2 notes, its Erda-like quality also reminiscent of the reverse fragment, to shift from the heretofore prevalent major mode back to minor, the Vala's trademark. as they breathe a halting staccato ghost of the spear, outlined entirely in long, short, long pulses, and tellingly harmonized in thirds, whose intervening quaver rests parse the module so it may be interpreted either as reverse melody or chord notes. This slight episode prefaced Sieglinde including herself among Hunding's chattel apparently took the Meister's fancy, and is notable for briefly shifting the meter from triple to duple for the second time in the act, broken by quaver rests filled with viola-cello pizzicato quaver chords after Haus and Weib. To stress their bitterness, her vocal goes on through static notes to leap up a fourth, then sink back on that interval after her second quaver rest through inverted heroic melody notes into chagrin, which, with its terminal sinking fifth, confirms Hunding as antithesis to the heroic ideal. After another quaver rest, equally important to Wagner, its fermata giving the information time to sink in, she offers the stranger guest rights until her husband returns. Her hasty vocal bounces up a third into a low ash interval, then sinks the same interval to intone reverse melody notes, and, following a crotchet rest, third drop and quaver rest, another chagrin pulse, its echo sanctioning the previous one. More subtly, this last phrase in her vocal, taken together, amounts to Loge's sly intrigues, working to cement this bond. For what purpose, only Erda knows. Meter briefly returning to triple, cellos reprise Siegmund's initial cell, octavo violas taking the Valhalla ash interval, to emphasize the threat Loge's craft seeks to have him defy on Sieglinde's account. And it works beautifully. His response, a cappella, but for the cello's final inverted ash interval and their single pizzicato, is built from three pulses of his morpheme spear-like phrase as he tacitly appeals to Hunding's mercy, given he's weaponless and wounded. Erda melody notes separate first and second spear descent, while a fourth lift between the second and third produces the scene's first anti-barrier. This revelation elicits a sharp reaction from his hostess, as violas leap up a semi-quaver arpeggio not unlike that of her own syntax, into a cello-supported dotted minim chord, over which she demands to be shown his wounds schnell. Her vocal, an ambivalent sketch of the Ringlust module, followed by extended reverse melody notes. A small point, it launches the couple's display of sympathy, most sopranos hurrying to the Welsung for a look. While the pair's distaff member seems more empathetic, the young hero reveals his own brand of that virtue as he minimizes his wounds to put Sieglinde's fears at rest. If his brief responsive arioso smacks a bit of egotism, boasting his limbs have been stronger than his weapons, it also raises a question no analyst nor any production has ever grappled, meaning what constitutes a god, how their bodies differed from Nibelung's giants and mortals, and how those disparities manifest in Wotan's demigod offspring. The allegorical school disdains this as irrelevant, while modern dress productions like Copenhagen sidestep it, portraying gods as no more than humans of high social rank. Siegmund's wounds, even if shown, which they often aren't, are perfunctory. Copenhagen's daintily blood-stained arm rag, a good example. This lack of attention to what realistic productions would deem important is another stumbling block audiences face in their attempt to credit the tale. A practical solution would not only improve the work's believability, but also, and as crucially, give strong voice to the musical syntax. The love music especially cries out for some unmistakable visual mark that the Welsung twins are physically different from the earthbound sphere in which they're abandoned. While addressing a core believability issue, it would highlight this pivotal syntax to make future hearings unforgettable, the whole point of the Meister's technique. Siegmund gives a hasty précis of his trials after the battle which drove him to flight, and, while he saves for his later narrative the details of that clash, the overall sense of him staving off a large host with bodily powers mighty enough to survive even his weapons. This suggests he'd think nothing of a cut on the arm, which, in its turn, implies he's suffered dramatically worse. But since Wagner's text makes no further reference to his injuries, directors pass them over. Siegmund's Arioso builds on distinctively spear-derived string modules, their long-short-long syncopations harmonized in thirds, more muscular versions of the viola line prefacing Sieglinde's admission of her chattel status. Meter shifting to duple, violins, violas begin a quaver into the downbeat with an abrupt rising triplet semiquaver ascent, an echo of Sieglinde's urgent figure to mark their god-giant consanguinity. It's answered by a sextuplet demi-semiquaver uprush in octavo-low strings which march down, violins, violas joining in at a parallax on the measure's last beat. After a dotted crotchet into the next measure, the Welsung hops up an air to fourth into a Welterb triad which, after a quaver's rest filled by a string chord, he rises a third into extended reverse melody notes, violins, violas, cellos, echoing as they march down their own syncopated line. Siegmund bustles through hasty phrases, interrupted only by quaver rests and a lone semiquaver. Rising from the upbeat on another third, he again sinks extended reverse melody notes into a heroic fifth lift, a second anti-barrier, followed with another Welterb triad, then a fourth ascent, another Rheinmaiden bounce. His accompaniment, two quaver string chords on second and fourth beat. His next song-like group consists of three falling reverse melody note phrases strung through static notes, each rising a fourth from the last, and preceded by strings, grace, demi-semiquavers, scalar lifts, the final one in quintuplets, each of their shorter spear descents ending in two punctuating quaver chords on third and fourth beat. The Welsung's initial phrase includes a reverse ash interval at its center on chord notes as it sinks through reverse melody notes. The second launched with another reverse ash interval on chord notes to twist through a chord note opposition, making its tail reverse melody notes. The third begun on a static ash interval, finished in more reverse melody notes. Wotan's shadow thus hangs heavy over this narrative, translating into background syntax the stage appearance Wagner hoped to arrange for the god. Instead, through Siegmund's morpheme and other spear-like modules, the immortal spreads his oral footprint throughout this chance meeting. Of equal interest, thanks to Sieglinde's remark about her sorry marital life, it's a foretaste of important Hunding syntax. Horns woodwinds creep in to augment strings which have dominated since the prelude's conclusion. Oboe-bassoon's horns punctuate the Welsung's find, capping their minim chord on a quaver sting, embellished by grace strings as he rests all but a full minim. He resumes, falling a third to lift a tritone into that cell-marking vitality built on a Welterb triad. A soft horn woodwind quaver punching his initial note strings his heroic rising fifth, which he contradicts with a plunging fifth through an ominous reverse dash interval, noting his weapon's loss. Beneath tremolo violin-viola chording, cellos evoke with prelude signs the storm from which he's just fled. Their descents triplets, his nearly minim rest giving the first of them full voice. A dotted quaver into the second, he describes his hunters to a low ash interval on a fourth, heading into another Welterb triad topped by chagrin, a tenth syntactic image of his plight. Violin-viola tremolos end on a quaver sting. Cellos race down semiquavers, then up a spear-opposing scale, a telescope prelude cell, another hint of that behind-the-scenes racial conflict. On its heels, and with only quaver chord punctuations, Siegmund mentions his trials in the storm to a braver high ash interval, if on another tritone, topped in reverse chord notes, from which, after a quaver pause, he falls that tritone to rise through melody notes, another barrier strophe. Cellos under violin viola tremolos, answering his phrase with a last storm pulse. Given the swift procession of syntactic wealth, even close study may overlook its abundance of Welterb triads, all of them related to Siegmund's metal. This distinctive module rifles the prelude, creeps through textures surrounding his personal morpheme to starkly introduce his first appearance. During his arietta's vocal, these modules sound 4 times in quick succession and, given the tale's overall narrative, telegraph the Welsung's violent antisocial side, which, though an audience doesn't yet know it, is exclusively of Wotan's making, an essential part of his schemes for the hero. From its womb in the ring, the Welterb triad has moved through Albrecht's lust, his magic powers, and racial hopes into Wotan's fascination with that power, and its nobler embodiment in Fasold. This Walküre passage maintains the drama's habit of opposing upward melody notes with their falling counterparts, one which becomes even stronger throughout the epic. As discussed in the Rheingold, this primal opposition has its birth in that chapter's prelude as an expression of burgeoning life. Here in Walküre, those cells come to mark the Vala's plans for the world, opposed by Wotan's racial stratagems, their nascent inferences blossoming through the Welsung's love. Siegmund's Arioso concludes on an arresting mood shift, as the young hero asserts his sadness has disappeared faster than he escaped his pursuers, nervous strings calming in 1 gentle semi-breve and 2 minim chords which creep towards Act 1's first key change. He shifts on chord notes into an abandonment triad, rising through a high ash interval to plunge a 6th, then, after a quaver pause, a low ash interval on another 6th. He moves from it through reverse melody notes and chord notes, a seemingly innocuous bit of filler, which nonetheless truncates the giant turn to make it the mirror of Fasold's longing for Freya, key shifting to A major, tempo back to triple on the last pitch of this uniquely important phrase. Horns woodwinds shoulder aside all but cellos, albeit with no more than increasingly radiant chording. First clarinet's subtle chord note strophe over cello's first slightly telescoped Siegmund pulse. The young hero's pace slows to minims and quavers as he remarks on his earlier sleep-like exhaustion, his low ash interval on reverse chord notes leading to a 4th descent and 3rd lift in a faint but hauntingly perceptible ghost of their love morpheme's harmonies, to launch cello's next Siegmund iteration. With it, 2nd bassoon falls through reverse melody notes, answered by 1st clarinet's melody notes, to banish all but woodwind's horns in 3 swelling dotted minim chords outlining a full cadence, another first for the act. With it, Siegmund exalts the sun, lacht, on him now, simile for his rapidly growing attraction to Sieglinde. His especially fecund vocal reproduces Wotan's 3rd bounces and ringlust module capped in a barrier, albeit its falling interval a 7th here, mark of Erda's covert inspiration. His tender joy marks another wordless interlude, as Sieglinde fetches a mead horn, her brief pantomime notably developing the prior mime, its Siegmund morpheme replaced by 4 consecutive iterations of Sieglinde's module. Violins intone all 4, bassoons doubling the 2nd, their counterpoint added to horns as those double the 3rd, both groups supporting the 4th, with added clarinet doubling. Dropping the earlier sequence's middle episode, strings alone move from the prior Sieglinde pulse into its falling spear lines, underlying counterpoint slightly altered. Horns add their doublings glow to the next Sieglinde iteration, then fade beneath its quasi-ring fragments. Strong as it is, the pair's affection is still enmeshed in the power conflict underlying it, and while Sieglinde's natural sign is a fillip, the passage's spear descent and falling triadic arpeggios redolent of the ring imply the threat hovering over this budding love. Those familiar with the story are forewarned the god's scheming is responsible for the Wälsung's apparently spontaneous love. It's less clear this unconventional union answers Wotan's need to counter the racial proliferation of Nibelungs and giants, much of Act 1's syntax dedicated to outlining that hidden thread. On the heels of the sequence's final turn, its last notes again held through the measure to rise in the next through melody notes, a subtle giant turn, Sieglinde's initial vocal embedded within it as she offers Siegmund the mead by rising through melody notes to fall a Welterb triad into another melody note strophe, yet another barrier pulse. After a crotchet rest, as she completes her presentation with intense poignancy, a winsome pair of clarinets double her, as she sings her own morpheme, final turn included. Clarinet's last note sustained, horns softly echo the module, as her brother's fond reaction. Atop its final held note, an expectant harmonic seventh chord, the young hero invites her to taste the cup, a vicarious way of touching her lips, his piquant, syntactic blend of abandonment triad and anti-barrier, a signal of the underlying danger. They taste the mead, each in turn, Sieglinde portrayed by solo clarinet with bassoon horn chord support rising through the libido-suggestive love cell's chromatics. This crescendos unexpectedly through an upward arching module surmounted by a sort of fate variant, with longing chord note finish. Siegmund takes einen langen Zug. As throbbingly earnest, strings take stage. Cellos the melodic syntax, a rising scale with third ascent leading to three essentially verbatim repetitions of the chromatic love module, a crystalline portrait of the twins' burgeoning physical attraction, which also subtly underlines their unwitting role in Wotan's racial schemes. The key returns effortlessly to F major for its third pulse, capped by thrusting up a triplet abandonment triad into three Freya strophes, the first intensified by its initial sforzando, the second weaker. Then, after falling on extended reverse melody notes, a last dispirited Freya iteration brings Rheingold's implications to the fore as guilty pangs take hold of Siegmund. Over the huskily foreboding rasp of a dark minor bassoon chord, cellos rise to climax through a series of repeated cells, at first blush a chain of Sieglinde's morpheme. Yet there are notable differences, from the initial reverse melody notes hinting at Wotan's racial plans, that module repeated in each Sieglinde morpheme short of a last rising note. Abandonment triads link them, already prominent both in Siegmund's and Sieglinde's material. The only exception, a lone 6/4 heroic air melody note pulse, for the harmony's sake. Seized with terrible foreboding, the young hero knows that, by alliance with him, this woman would bear his racial mark of doom. Bassoons fall out as cellos rise uneasily to a climactic recall of Valhalla Part 4, Cook's Valhalla cadence, specifically that syntactic bundle's variant including Wotan's Rheingold inspiration, birth of his Wälsung plan, here speaking volumes about Siegmund's character and the twins' underlying dilemma. A high ash interval launches it, this purer form eclipsing Wotan's low version, while retaining that earlier cell's heroic rising fifth. Violas double the present ash interval, then sadly etch the love morpheme, cellos dropping out after its initial chord notes and air-to-chord harmonization. The love morpheme's poignant minor mode captures their plight, the bundle's absent spear bass suggesting their ignorance of the god, never mind potential freedom from his tyranny. Siegmund instinctively senses the danger he poses Sieglinde, the ash interval reversed from its Rheingold incarnation, aligning his insight with Erda's natural purity. For emphasis, the love morpheme's second horn woodwind pulse, bitter on pathetic English horn, is underpinned by another Erda chord pulse. With this bundle's final crotchet, unaccompanied cellos slide down his morpheme, to cap it on an abandonment triad's reminder of the danger he poses. The hero indicts himself a cappella by rising a third into a Welterb triad, followed by reverse melody notes, two modules redolent of Wotan's racial hopes, the last through a dire inverted ash interval. Goaded by a demi-semi-quaver cello-viola scalar lift with its inevitable sense of Alberich's resentment, he invokes the god to protect her, at least per the Spencer-Millington translation, a phrase begun with chord notes and third drop into a bold crib on Sieglinde's module, its reverse melody notes punched between their first two pitches by a lone string quaver chord. Strings rise decisively through a duo of Sieglinde variants, pairs of horn woodwind crotchet chords punctuating each iteration, as he bricht auf, the orchestra falling silent to leave Siegmund virtually a cappella, while he declares himself refreshed, bouncing on thirds to sink through reverse melody notes into a quaver rest punched by a quaver string chord. He follows it through a descending pair of reverse chord notes separated by a fourth descent, strings lifting from his vocal into a cadential formula on swelling quaver chords, one to a beat. Atop the last two, Siegmund resolves to leave, dropping a third into chord notes and a static triplet capped by a darkly resolute plunging fifth. This inspires another pair of Sieglinde cribs, enriched by horn woodwind chording, to stress his determination. Second violin quavers bowed as semi-quavers, lifting an abandonment triad into a rising series of falling intervals. Spurred by the band's last stentorian quaver chord, she begs to know what pursues him, a cappella vocal a barrier. Yet another hint their love is the real obstacle to their father's plans. The next measures echoing langsam bundles support the hero opening his heart to her by admitting misfortune follows wherever he goes, a passage the Meister takes pains to make both threatening and achingly pathetic. Each bundle lies a minor third above the last, introduced by semi-breve viola-cello unisons which swell into the next measure, where our horns woodwinds identify it as basis of a wrenching minor seventh, by adding their sharp minor mode dotted minim. Atop each, the Welsung sings a static ash interval, only to fall a pathetic sixth as low strings take over with a dotted minim octavo, implying the harmony's cadential resolution. With it, Siegmund descends on extended reverse melody notes with their obvious relation to the spear, as well as his own morpheme, their tails parsed as chord notes. With the third unison, again raised a third, horns, oboes add a particularly agonizing sting, the three unisons taken together harmonically outlining an abandonment triad. This third, most biting unison, however, decrescendos into a love pulse with its sensual logichromatics, on horns bassoons dovetailed into a cello reverberation, a potent memory of their love's initial glow. The young hero's heartbreaking nostalgia for something he believes he can never have. Siegmund bounces on thirds as strings' final chord notes swell into reverse melody notes on a somber minor triad woodwind chord, over which he vows to an abandonment triad he'll not bring down his evil luck on Sieglinde. He finishes this ironic resolution to desert her on the words, "Fort wenn ich Fuß und Blick." With the compact syntactic bundle, the Rhine Maiden's joyful bounce shaped as a retrograde heroic melody note pulse and rising octave, one of the few the Welsung ever sings, here capped by reverse melody notes emphasizing the natural justice of his urge to sever their racial connection before it can be consummated sexually. As he makes for the hut's door to raise its latch, horn woodwind strings dovetail his phrase into a hasty syncopated reprise of his initial guilt. Low strings, horns, third bassoon, intertwining an air-to-melody distortion, Siegmund's intent to do the right and natural thing. A last powerful orchestral crotchet announces Sieglinde's resolve, who pulls him up short with an a cappella cry begging him to stay, her low ash interval on a third. Horn's woodwinds punctuate her on the next downbeat with the painful diminished seventh dotted minim chord, as she pathetically declares he can't bring ill luck to a luckless house, with a static ash interval that becomes the basic love module, as horn woodwind chords emphasize its chord notes, extended into reverse melody notes. Her third bounce, ominous reflection of Wotan's Rheingold inspiration, leads to reverse melody notes, then a heart-wrenching reverse chord note anticipation into a terminal crotchet, English horns sinking against it on doleful chord notes. This intense display of fellow feeling moves him to linger during the ensuing pantomime as a morpheme appears definitively, whose profound significance extends across the entire drama, the couple's tragic bond ultimately casting its long shadow over their as yet unconceived son. Octavo low strings outline syntax which, though universally recognized, has never inspired a definitive name. A symbol of the Welsungen family in its love and pain. Motive of the Welsung race. Volsung's woe, a motive of Sieglinde. The Volsung race as instruments of destiny. Welsung ordeal, and Volsung's bond of sympathy. The one link between these monikers, a tragic nobility specific to this pair, attends the morpheme throughout its varied career. Here in Walküre, at the moment of its birth, it seems uniquely Siegmund's, played as it is by the same low-string ensemble which, along with versions on cellos alone, sounds his beleaguered morpheme. Sieglinde's winsome ring treaty-derived sign alternates with this new module, first on viola violins, then violins alone. A kind of metaphorical sonic embrace between the two, the syntax builds on already familiar modules, thus deepening its morphemic significance. The syntax launches on a turn, a chord note opposition, echoing that which Sieglinde has only just sung. Fundament of Erda's dreaming might, if writ small in these demigod mortals. After the poignant upward leaf of a major sixth, it descends through a Welterb triad, intimation of the ring fragment, which brings with it from Rheingold a bouquet of ominous racial overtones. Even in this ennobled mood, its negative aspects can't be ignored. In essence, the Welsung twins' bond is Wotan's play to blend the ring's evil effects on Nibelung's, as witnessed during his trip to Nibelheim, with the giant's rough nobility, his aim to checkmate both racial imperatives with his own loftier vision. Siegmund's Welterb triad opposes the rising treaty-derived abandonment triad, and it's no accident Wotan's first Valhalla encomium closely juxtaposes Welterb triad with its abandonment inversion. Sieglinde's concluding reverse melody notes further cementing her unknown father's plans. The syntax's deep irony is that, while it underlines Siegmund's greater role in his father's strategy, it also casts doubt on whether Sieglinde's module, as a ring inversion, can bring that longed-for item back to the god. The Meister's inspiration runs at an especially high pitch in this deceptively simple passage, as octavo low strings paint a sonic picture of Welsung's inner struggle, his certain knowledge he brings tragedy to Sieglinde at war with the twins' mutual affinity, which stage directions reinforce. Siegmund bleibt tiefer stüttert stehen, Vorsicht in Sieglindes Mienen, diese schlägt verschämt und traurig die Augen nieder. At first glance, low strings appear to wander through a kind of free improvisation devoid of syntactic interest, but nothing could be further from the truth, whose modules clearly specify the Welsung's innermost thoughts. Octava low strings begin with the Welterb triad, followed on the spot by a hopefully ascending octave, as if to contradict the triad's evil influence with nature's energy in its purest form. Melody notes follow, which, together with the sixth descent inciting them, outline a barrier that leads to another Welterb triad, then racially charged reverse melody notes, which move through a dire inverted ash interval, reflecting Siegmund's morpheme, an abandonment triad finishing the bundle. Taken as a whole, the line's contradictory elements sketch the Welsung's unconscious sense of his indenture to Wotan's plots, struggling with the better natural persona which might guard Sieglinde against his dark side. Unable to resist, Siegmund concludes the period a cappella, declaring his name as Wewald, roughly sorrowful or sorrow-ridden, to a Welterb triad and reverse melody notes, as if resigning himself to the god's budding racial schemes. After a resolute demi-semiquaver uprush on low strings violas into a sharp quaver, the Welsung resolves to linger and meet his nemesis, uttering Hunding's name to a plunging air de fourth, tapped with the muted threat of unison horns Valhalla ash interval. Pizzicato strings punching its last note on the following downbeat. Though neither Welsung knows it, this marks the power enslaved in Valhalla, which their bond is meant to perpetuate. An audience soon learns it also connotes Hunding, a paradox the syntax soon clarifies. Siegmund caps his declaration, sliding down hyper-extended reverse melody notes, a blatant tribute to the spear, his semiquaver rest a hesitation breaking it into chord and reverse notes. That's it for now. We've made a bit more progress now that the act's beginning has put in place much of its syntax. The next video picks up where this one leaves off, the brief interlude following Siegmund's decision to remain, top staved over full score, page 30. As always, thanks for watching, and please do leave your comments below. Time and energy allowing, I'll do everything I can to respond. Lastly, as all YouTubers know, your subscription to this channel by itself is a huge asset in completing this vast project. Hit the bell to be notified of the next videos. With luck and your support, there's a lot more to come.